Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, and coming up on today's programme, nearly 2 weeks on from the toppling of Bashar al-Assad, the UN is calling for elections in Syria. Meanwhile, Turkey suggests removing the HTS group from terror lists. The Houthis say that Israeli airstrikes on Yemen will not deter them from supporting the people of Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel says whoever strikes us will be hit sevenfold. During his annual address, the Russian President Vladimir Putin says he's ready to speak any time with the US President-elect Donald Trump about the war in Ukraine. And as the drone saga in the United States continues, President Joe Biden's attempts to reassure the public don't seem to be having the desired effect. We'll be speaking to two mayors in New Jersey to get their take. Hello and welcome to the programme. We begin in Syria, where the United Nations is calling for, quote, free and fair elections. This a few weeks after the Assad dynasty was toppled. Well, the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, says that there must be a new constitution, inclusive political engagement, and elections that include all Syrians. This in line, he says, with Resolution 2254. Well, Turkey, meanwhile, has suggested that the United Nations and the international community remove the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group from its terror list. Well, HTS is an offshoot of al-Qaeda, and the group has been sanctioned by the United States and by the UK. Well, they were behind the lightning offensive, which led to former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad fleeing to Russia earlier on this month. Well, the leader of HTS, Ahmad al-Shara, is trying to reassure the world that his armed group does not pose a threat to Syria's neighbours or to the West. Well, speaking to the British broadcaster, the BBC, al-Shara asked that sanctions be lifted since the HTS, quote, has not committed crimes that justify calling them a terrorist group. Well, he added that the victim and the oppressor must not be treated in the same way. Well, for an outlook on what post-Bashar al-Assad Syria is facing, we're joined now by the former British ambassador to Syria, Henry Hogger. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Great to have you with us once again on Al Arabiya News. I just want to start by asking you for your thoughts on what Ahmad al-Shara has been saying to the British media.
Yeah, well, good morning, I think, for you. Yes, I heard the interview that al-Shara gave to Jeremy Byrne last night, and I agree, I think, with what you were saying, that he seemed to be taking considerable pains to show that his organisation, HTS, is no longer what we would call a jihadi or certainly terrorist organisation, that it is wants to be inclusive and bring all Syrians into the new government, and you referred to earlier to elections. They have said that they want to do elections within, I can't remember, I think it's 3 months or so. All that is the right noises. Obviously, it's important to see what happens in reality on the ground. But I certainly don't detect so far any signs other than that they do genuinely want to establish an inclusive and, one would hope, democratic government based on a constitution, as the UN envoy has requested.
Yeah, indeed. They've been saying, haven't they, all along, judge us on our actions, not just by our words. And we've had about 2 weeks to judge their actions. I'm wondering, I mean, it doesn't sound like there's anything you've seen or heard that's made you draw anything other than a fairly favourable conclusion?
I think that's right. I mean, I obviously don't have any sort of on-the-ground information that's any more than others who are in touch with the media. But I was interested to hear this morning that the new UN humanitarian coordinator, Tom Fletcher, who of course is a former ambassador and foreign policy official at Number 10, saying that he's actually been all over, well, in several different parts of the country, talking to ordinary Syrians on the ground of all different sort of complexions and origins, and that the impression he comes away with from that is that so far, at least, there's a willingness by most people to give the new order the benefit of the doubt. No doubt partly because for most of those people, I guess anything is better than what they had before, which was where they had no personal security, where people were detained and executed more or less at will and all that. So it can only be an improvement on the ground thus far. But I'm sure, like outside observers, that many of those people will be waiting rather cautiously to see whether the HTS Leopard has actually really changed its former jihadi spots, if I put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, some countries sounding extremely cautious. For example, the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister described HTS as wolves in sheep's clothing. And then yesterday, I interviewed Donald Trump's pick for counter-terrorism envoy, and he said that these kinds of organizations never change, and he suggested it was naive to believe that they might do. So it does sound, doesn't it, like not everyone is being quite as generous in their assessment of HTS as perhaps you and some of the Europeans.
Well, I think that's right. But I mean, taking Israel, for example, I mean, they've hardly been helping in any way to allow what I call the new Syria to get off to a good start by a succession of air attacks on various military facilities on the Syrian fleet base in Tartus and so on. And as I understand it, by trying to take more ground up in the Golan, the area that they already occupy. So, you can hardly say that's been positive. As for the comment by Mr. Trump's spokesman, well, I'm not sure if I agree that these organizations never change their spots. I mean, it can go both ways, but I certainly know of at least individuals who have been very firm adherents to jihadi type Islamist militant organizations who have become very respected advisors, including in some cases in Britain and to former British governments. So I think they can change. I certainly don't disagree with being cautious, and the issue of what you call it, delisting them from the list of terrorist organizations is a very sensitive one, and I'm not in any position to advise it one way or the other. What I do think, by the way, though, is that despite all that, there is definitely a case for an early and major injection of humanitarian aid on the ground in Syria, because there are all sorts of consequences that will flow from not providing that.
Yes. Yeah, in fact, I was going to ask you about that right this moment, because obviously there is a serious humanitarian crisis there in Syria. We were talking to David Miliband, the CEO of the IRC yesterday, saying, there's a grave humanitarian situation, and there's an argument therefore, isn't there, going back to what we were saying earlier, for talking to whoever is in power in the interests of making sure that aid is distributed in an effective way.
Absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think it's interesting that both David Miliband and Tom Fletcher, who I was mentioning earlier, have very considerable diplomatic and political experience, as well as their current humanitarian roles. And I would expect them, therefore, to realize that there is actually a political case for bringing in humanitarian aid. First of all, doing so doesn't necessarily imply any judgment on recognition or acceptance of the authority that you're dealing with. There's plenty of other places around the world where humanitarian aid is being supplied, even with some very much nastier regimes in charge, in order to try and get to the ordinary people who suffer from those regimes. So the political point is clear, and I think there's another one related to that, which is that the longer a country like Syria now is left desperate, destitute, because of the way that the regime ran down its economy and the conflict and so on, the more young people you've got out there who've got no jobs, who've got no prospects, and are a fertile recruiting ground for what I call the real terrorist organizations, who, of course, the more people they recruit, the greater a threat they pose to us in the West.
So you're saying there's a correlation between the lack of any opportunity, the lack of any kind of prosperity, and indeed a desperate humanitarian situation, and the likelihood that people could be pushed in the direction of of extreme ideologies?
Well, I think that's not just an opinion from me. I think you look at recent history, movements like Hamas, like Hezbollah. I think most people recognize grew out of poverty, lack of opportunity, unemployment, and all those other things in the occupied territories in case of Hamas, and in Lebanon and so on with Hezbollah. So I don't think, as I say, I don't think it's a judgment simply by me. I think it's I think that correlation is proven historically.
There are lots of countries weighing up whether or not to remove HTS from their list of terror organizations. Turkey saying it's considering doing that. And I mean, it looks from the outside that Turkey is shaping up to be one of the significant countries in terms of the shape that Syria is going to take moving forward. I mean, I wonder if you agree with that. Which other countries do you think are shaping up to be influential in the direction that Syria goes in?
Well, I think it depends what you mean by influential. I already mentioned Israel. I think it's being influential in a probably rather negative way. But I'm not an expert on Turkey. But the only thing I'd say is that I think it's clear that they have been a major sponsor of the authority more or less run by HTS in Idlib in the northwest of Syria, obviously on the border with Turkey there. And I think that Erdogan probably sees them as a buttress against the influence of the Kurds, who run the area further along to the east, most of the northeastern part of Syria. He's only glad to have such a buttress because of his fears about the knock-on effect on Kurdish separatists in Turkey itself. And I think also probably, I mean, Erdogan is broadly speaking of what you might call a mild Islamist bent, and therefore he may find that the ideology of HTS, suits him rather well, and that's the sort of current he'd like to see coming to the fore in his neighbouring country.
I mean, the Kurds you mentioned there, I mean, they do pose a bit of a dilemma to Syria's new leaders. What's going to happen to them, and not just them, but the other armed factions that are operating in Syria? I mean, how do you see them being integrated into the next chapter of Syria?
Well, all I can say, Tom, is I'm quite glad I don't have that problem to deal with myself, because it's going to be difficult. I mean, the result of all these years of conflict is that the Syrian population is probably one of the most heavily armed in the world. There are guns in not necessarily every household, but a lot of them. And there are, as you say, all these different more minor sects, some of which have been present in Idlib itself in that sort of provisional administration. The Kurds are a problem, as you say. It may be that the Turks have a down on the Kurds, but on the other hand, the Americans have been supporting them very strongly, primarily as a source of support in tackling the remains of ISIS and al-Qaeda up in that part of Syria. So, I mean, yeah, it's extremely complicated, and I think that the new leadership is going to, I mean, they're making the right noises, but I think they're going to have some real challenges to tackle in trying to weld the country, as we all hope, into some kind of coherent and, as I said earlier, more or less democratic country run on the basis of constitutional legitimacy.
Yeah, while you were talking, we were looking at some pictures of Syria, the latest pictures on the ground. Some of them show the airport, flights taking off once again from Damascus International Airport. So a sign of some sort of a return to normalcy for the country. But I mean, there is another risk for the new leadership in Syria. We've already talked about these different factions. There are these external influences, such as Russia, such as Iran, such as Hezbollah, that don't want to see this new leadership succeed. I mean, I'm just wondering what can be done to mitigate the chances of interference on their part.
Well, the players that you're talking about are not ones that we in the West really have a great deal of leverage over, to be honest. I think as Iran, perhaps there may be a bit of sort of self-fulfillment in that they have taken such a battering with the more or less demise of Hezbollah and Hamas, at least militarily. So they've lost a lot of their stooges in the Arab world. If they've got any sense that regime, which is, after all, under internal pressure too from dissident movements and so on, they'll draw their horns in a bit and stay back on the sidelines. And Russia too, I mean, they've had a bloody nose from all this because their protege in Damascus is now probably not very welcome guest within their own country. Of course, they've got a lot of other things to worry about with Ukraine and their efforts to interfere now in other European countries, Georgia and Romania and so on. So I think they've got quite a lot of other things to worry about. It's, I hope, not too wishful thinking that they too will sort of sit back and take a bit of a back seat rather than trying to stir things up too violently for the new disposition in interest. And there is one thing that, I mean, Russia doesn't benefit either from a resurgence of Islamist terrorism, as you know. I mean, they've had enough of that kind of trouble in their own within their own sphere of influence over the last few years. So I'm not sure if they'll want to push too hard against the efforts to settle things down within Syria.
Just lastly, I mean, we're talking here about Syria, a country you know well. You served there almost 25 years ago as ambassador. It's a country that's been scarred by decades of torture. There's been disappearances, summary executions, 70% of the population now living in need of aid. How long do you think it's going to take for a country with that amount of baggage to heal and reconstruct?
Well, I think it's going to take a long time. I wouldn't like to put a timescale on it, but as you say, those scars run very deep. I was very lucky to be posted in Syria 20 years ago when there wasn't conflict, when it was, in fact, a wonderful country to explore because of the generosity and hospitable nature of the ordinary people. And I don't think that's changed very much. But of course, what has happened is that different factions have been set against each other. And this is against the background, historically, in fact, of a very tolerant society that grew up with coexistence among Jews, Christians, Muslims of different sects, and so on. But one would love to see things going back gradually to that state of affairs, but it's not going to be a quick business. And I would just like to say, sort of in relation to that, there's a slight tendency with some European governments, including our own now, to say, well, it's done and dusted. The Syrians can all go back. The refugees we've got in our countries can all go back now because it's perfectly safe, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, of course it isn't. And it isn't going to be for quite a while, and certainly not economically viable to go back and try and make a living there. So I think my plea is just, let's not push our Syrian guests out too abruptly, because let's give them a little bit of opportunity to assess for themselves what the prospects are if they do go back.
OK, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time once again. Henry Hogger, thank you. In other news, the Palestinian group Hamas has reacted to Israel's strikes in Yemen today, calling them, quote, a dangerous development. This after Israel struck ports and energy infrastructure in Yemen after intercepting a missile attack by the Houthis. Well, the Israeli attack, involving 14 fighter jets and other aircraft, came in two waves. The first series of strikes on the port of Salif and Ras Isa, and the second series hitting the capital Sana'a. Well, the Yemeni Houthis were launching attacks on international shipping in the Red Sea corridor. They've been doing that since November of last year, in what they say is solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza. Well, in response to missile attacks by the Houthis, Israel is threatening more attacks on Yemen. The Israeli defense minister says, quote, whoever strikes us will be hit sevenfold.
I suggest to the leaders of the Houthis in Yemen to see, understand, and remember, whoever raises a hand against the state of Israel, his hand will be cut off. Whoever strikes us will be hit sevenfold. We will strike with force, and we will not allow the continuation of the situation of firing and threats against the state of Israel.
Well, we're joined now by Charles David Freilich, the former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor. Thank you so much for joining us, Chuck. I just want to ask you, first of all, why Israel is carrying out these airstrikes on Yemen. And as an extension of that, what do you read into the choices of target?
Well, I think the answer is pretty self-evident. The Houthis have been regularly launching ballistic missiles and UAVs, drones, at Israel ever since the war began, and were already beginning to impose a maritime blockade against Israel, I believe even before the war began. Now, Yemen is 2,000 kilometers away from Israel, so there is no reason for this other than the fact that the Houthis, who control part of Yemen, are a radical Islamist organization, and whose one of their basic goals is to bring about Israel's destruction. So this is really a matter of self-defense, and Israel has already responded on a couple of occasions. So far, it hasn't succeeded in deterring the Houthis. We'll see if this round does. The targets were basic national infrastructure, such as ports, electric facilities, partly because it's just too hard to find all the Houthi fighting forces, which are dispersed and hidden all around Yemen. So for lack of choice, that's really what leads to the choice of targets.
Obviously, Israel has been extremely focused militarily on what's been happening in Gaza, also what's been happening in Lebanon, to a certain extent what's been happening in Syria, and also in Iran. I'm just wondering, do you expect perhaps as the focus moves away from Lebanon and Gaza, where there could be a ceasefire deal, we don't know, but in the days ahead, could there be a shift in focus now towards Yemen, do you think?
Well, I think there could be something of a shift, but I don't think that what kept Israel from responding more significantly until now was the ongoing fighting on the other fronts. It was a hope that maybe more limited responses and international responses might do it. Unfortunately, the international response has been quite limited, although the U.S. did launch a limited attack on the Houthis, I believe it was yesterday. Yemen is very, very far from Israel. It's not like Gaza or Hezbollah in Lebanon, where flight time is maybe a couple of minutes, if that. This is far away. It's about as far as the outer limits, let's say, of Israel's capabilities. Launching an operation such as this is, even if it's not a big attack, it's a big operation because of the distances, the need for refueling, command and control aircraft, intelligence aircraft, and rescue aircraft. So it's a big deal. We'll see. Israel may now decide to respond more significantly, more regularly. But I think the hope at least is still that maybe the Houthis will decide not to continue.
Obviously, Iran has had quite a number of setbacks, as have Iran-linked groups and interests in the last few weeks and months, notably the degrading of Hezbollah, the toppling of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. And I'm just wondering how that's been felt, how you perceive that to have been felt by the Houthis. I mean, do you think this has made something of a difference to how they view their strength and how they can flex their muscles in the region?
Well, I think there is a certain maybe gloating on their part, a sense that they're the only ones who have so far successfully withstood Israel's responses. I think it's a degree of overconfidence which they may come to regret.
Yemen is obviously feeling the effects of a profound economic crisis, one of the worst humanitarian disasters in the world. And I'm just wondering whether that as well is meaning that the Houthis are under domestic pressure for bringing about such misery for the people that live there?
One would think so, and one would hope so, but the Yemeni economic crisis has actually been going on for many decades, and certainly for the last decade. So I don't think it's directly related to the war. One could make the argument that one of the ways that the Houthis might want to address it is by directing domestic opinion externally, diverting people's attention from their domestic difficulties. I don't imagine that that's a significant reason for what's going on, or whether it will have too much of an impact on Yemeni public opinion.
Just lastly, Chuck, I mean, I'm interested to know, I mean, the Houthis have said since the 7th of October that they're operating in solidarity with the Palestinians. And I'm just wondering whether you see here the automatic de-escalation or the automatic end to hostilities with Yemen if a ceasefire deal in Gaza is indeed struck.
Well, first of all, we have to see that the deal is struck. We've faced periods of heightened optimism numerous times in the last year plus, unfortunately. Maybe this time, hopefully, it'll prove different. If the Houthis really mean that their attacks were related to the Gaza war, then logically, your question would lead to the conclusion that yes, they will stop firing at Israel, and that will lead to an immediate ceasefire. I hope that's the case. I hope they haven't become too enamored of their role as the last standing force in the axis of resistance. And they do have an ideological commitment to Israel's destruction. We'll see. It's early to say. Hopefully that might make a difference.
All right, Chuck Freilich, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
In other news, the Russian President Vladimir Putin says he's ready to compromise with the US President-elect Donald Trump with regards to the war in Ukraine. Well, when he was asked about what he might be able to offer Trump, Putin dismissed an assertion that Russia was in a weak position, saying that Russia had got much stronger since he ordered troops into Ukraine in 2022.
What can I offer to the President-elect Trump when we meet? First of all, I don't know when we will meet because he doesn't say anything about it. I haven't spoken to him for more than 4 years, and I am ready for it. Of course, at any time, and I will be ready for a meeting if he wants it. You and the people who pay your wages in the US would be very much like Russia to be in a weakened position. I have a different point of view. I believe that Russia has become much stronger over the past 2 or 3 years. Why? Because we are becoming a truly sovereign country. We are no longer dependent on anyone.
President Putin speaking there at his annual year-end phone-in and news conference. Well, he's also been accusing Ukraine of terrorism following on from the murder of the Russian general Igor Kirillov, who was killed in an explosion outside a Moscow apartment building on Tuesday. Well, Russia said yesterday it had detained an Uzbek man who'd confessed to planting and detonating the device on the instructions of Ukraine's SBU security service.
Вы сказали покушение.
You said it was an assassination. I'm grateful to you for this because you indirectly acknowledged that this is a terrorist act. Why? Because this is a murder committed in a way that is dangerous for the lives of many people. The regime in Kiev has repeatedly committed such crimes, terrorist attacks against many citizens of the Russian Federation.
Well, President Putin was asked about all these various issues at an annual year-end phone-in and news conference. Well, for more, we can speak to Abbas Gallyamov, who's a former speechwriter for the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you about this annual year-end phone-in and news conference. I'm just wondering how closely watched it is there in Russia.
Well, I watched all this a little more than 4 hours.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, I watched it for the whole event, almost more than 4 hours.
What sort of viewership does it have? I mean, is it something that everyone in Russia tunes in and watches?
Not now. Look, when he just came, when he started this program, yes, it was extremely popular. But now, 25 years after, no, few people really, few people believe that he'll tell something interesting or he'll change something. Like people got accustomed to that. Well, yes, he can speak, he can promise, he's explaining everything nicely, but nothing is changing for the best in life. Actually, everything is changing from bad to worse, and so people are kind of disappointed.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I mean, sometimes during these phone-ins, I'm told, although I don't understand what's being said because I don't speak Russian, but people call in, they ask questions that can be sometimes a little bit uncomfortable for the president to answer. Do people remain cautious, however, about what they ask him, or do people feel quite free to ask him really anything they want?
No, look, definitely Russia is not a free country now at all. Even 25 years ago, when it was pretty democratic, there was still the feeling of like, discipline. Like this is a national leader, you cannot feel free, feel at ease with him. He's not just like a chap, old pal, or your classmate whom you can talk anything about. Of course, it was not like it was never like this. Everyone had the feeling that he's like a big deal. And now when we have like not authoritarian, almost totalitarian state, you should understand what is happening in Russia. Well, in this case, of course, like everyone is afraid to say something which he wouldn't like. And actually, you should understand that this event is no longer free from the point of view of who are calling and who are talking to him. It's a pre-organized event with predetermined questions. It's all staged up. Almost nothing. Like 95% of the questions asked, they were controlled by his press officers. Like just several questions might be relatively free, and when they give floor to BBC or some other independent Western journalists, yes, those are free to ask anything, including something unpleasant for Putin. But no, like basically, Putin knows what they're going to ask. So just a few questions which are not controlled by Putin's office, like this.
Yeah, I mean, you've painted the picture of someone who's changed quite a lot over the years. That was the impression I was getting from your answer in the early part of it. And even by President Putin's own admission, one of the things that stood out for me is that he said that he jokes and laughs much less than he used to. I think he was saying this with regards to the war in Ukraine ongoing now and entering its fourth year, I should say. What do you read into this? What's your interpretation of why he said that? Do you think he is a much changed man?
I think he doesn't care for people being killed, but he's a good actor, and he understands what to say and how to behave. So he understands that he should show like respect and being sorry with regard to all these people being killed, because like if he doesn't do it, he's out of touch with the country. You should understand that he's losing popular support now, like at speed which is constantly growing. And if he starts adding to this speed by doing such blunders, like showing that he doesn't care, well, he doesn't want to do this. So it's just staged up. It's just the matter of game. If he really cared for these people, he wouldn't have been doing what he is doing, because there are no objective reasons why there should be war.
We're going to talk a bit more about some of the content in the speech in just a moment, but I just want to ask you, since you wrote speeches for President Putin, I don't know how close your working relationship was, perhaps you can tell us, but what was it like working for him and writing speeches for him? Did he tend to stick to the speech, or would he go off script? Tell us a bit about him.
No, when I worked for him, I worked for him all in all 3 years, for 3 years, 1 year when he was president and 2 years when he was prime minister. So last time it was 2010, so it was pretty long ago. At that time, he was not sticking to the speech, to the script at all. If he felt that he was just opening the text and beginning to read it, and then if he wanted to add something, he would pick up his eyes. It's visible actually. He's picking up his eyes. He starts speaking. Then he's coming back to the speech and speaking. Sometimes he's reading a little, then putting it aside and starts speaking. If he feels that he knows what he wants, so he's in this respect he's quite able speaker. So it's not that he needs a written text for all the time. Basically, he needs it just to start, to set the train moving, and maybe to read while he's in the car going to the event. He has this text there in the car waiting for him, so he's maybe going through it, checking the facts, and getting the ideas which he wants to express, and then he's speaking off the hand, freely, fluently.
Okay, so you're saying he's a gifted public speaker in Russian. He works hard and he's diligent on the speech. Now, going back to the content, he talked about Ukraine quite considerably. He talked about Ukraine. He talked about the fact that he is ready, quote, any time for talks with the incoming US President Donald Trump. He also talked about how he's ready for negotiations and compromises. He's sounding a lot more conciliatory, isn't he, than he was perhaps a year ago?
Well, the objective situation is that he needs to finish this war. In spite of his troops moving forward, the tensions, the strain, they are really hard. It's not only about the battlefield where his army is going through tremendous losses, and he really is lacking people now. Soon there would be no people for him to continue his advancement. But it's not only about this, it's about weaponry. His officials responsible for producing weapons, they are speaking that in current economic situation, they would all soon go bankrupt. Chemizov, the head of Rostech, the chief producer of the Russian arms, Russian weaponry, he spoke in the upper chamber of the Russian Parliament Federation Council something like two months ago, and he told that even export of weaponry, the most profitable industrial undertaking which you can imagine, is already becoming, under current financial situation, is already becoming unprofitable. So he's publicly telling that soon the whole industrial complex would collapse. So of course it's being told not like when you're speaking to officials, not like on this widely broadcast propaganda channels like today's event, but still people speak about this. So it's people, it's weapons, like the population is exhausted. People really want this to stop. There is no longer support for any war. People just want normalization. They want to come back to pre-war period. This is just their dream. Like the economy is crumbling, foreign policy, like he couldn't save Assad, which was his chief ally in the Middle East. His whole Middle Eastern policy just failed. Now it's in ruins because everything was everything came to Syria. Everything was based on tied up around Syria, and now Syria is the country where his chief ally is lying in ruins. So he cannot continue this for a long time. And you know, one more point. Trump came as an opposition to Biden, to the previous American administration. So it's a really good chance for Putin to restart relations with America and maybe try to normalize them, because the continuation of the previous course, which was very inimical, unfriendly, like Cold War course, it definitely all the sanctions. It definitely leads towards ultimate ruin. and there is a chance to change that. So he should use this chance. Definitely, he understands it, because if he now makes enemy out of Trump, he made enemy out of Biden. Now he cannot afford to make enemy out of Trump. So he understands that. That's why he sounds more conciliatory than before. But of course, the question is how much he can yield, because he still needs to come back to Russia from the war with something which would look like victory. He cannot afford appearing in front of the elites, of population, without victory. What you lost to Ukraine, like this will completely ruin his image of a strong man, because, like for many, many years, they were creating this feeling that Ukrainians, they're some they're like subordinate nations, some artificial state, failed state, artificial nation, they're definitely not competitors to us. We are like a great power. And now we cannot win them. So either they are great power or we are not.
All right.
So Putin cannot afford to come back without victory. So he has to combine these two things. Combine these two things, like not to make enemy with Trump, but then still try to get something from Trump.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Really appreciate you, though, taking the time to speak to us, Abbas Gallyamov. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Now, in recent weeks, US citizens, particularly in the state of New Jersey, have been gripped by panic over drone sightings lingering in the night skies. Well, adding to the mystery is the perception that the US government has been slow to respond, offering no clear explanation. Well, this has gone on to fuel numerous conspiracy theories. Some citizens and officials alike say they suspect the drones of being Iranian spy tools launched from so-called Iranian motherships. Others have suggested they could be extraterrestrials. Well, let's take a look at a video one person posted on X.
Someone called the cops on these lights. See, even the police, they're going crazy. These aliens are attacking.
Well, in an attempt to reassure the public, the US President Joe Biden has stated there is nothing, quote, nefarious about this drone phenomenon that's been observed along the country's east coast.
Nothing nefarious, apparently, but they're checking it all out. I think it's just one. There's a lot of drones authorized up there. I think one started and they all got it. Everybody wanted to get in the deal. But we're following it closely. So far, no sense of the danger.
US President speaking there, all amongst those from the US House Intelligence Committee who've spoken to reporters after Biden's address was Representative Chrissy Houlihan, a Democrat, who reaffirmed that these drones were nothing to worry about. She also said that they were not related to foreign powers, nor, she said, did they belong to aliens, as she put it, little green men who are working on the American people. Well, despite all the attempts to reassure the US public, the Federal Aviation Administration has decided to temporarily ban all drone operations in several areas of New Jersey until the 17th of January. They say they will use deadly force against the unmanned vehicles if they believe they pose a threat to national security. Well, for more on this, we can speak now to the Mayor of Belleville, Michael Melham, and also to Ryan Hurd, who is the Mayor of Pequannock Township. Both towns, I should add, are in New Jersey. Let me start with you, Ryan. I mean, what is the situation in your town? Are there continued sightings? Is there continued alarm?
Yes. Well, number one, thank you for having me on. Last night was a little rainy and a little cloud cover, so we really didn't see any. But the night before, on my way to the high school for our Christmas concert, I was able to see 4. So Here's the issue. The residents of Pequannock, as well as the residents of this great state of New Jersey, we want answers. And that's what we expect, whether you're in New Jersey, USA, or any country in the world. You know, the residents expect that the leaders are going to reassure us, that are going to answer our questions, that the leaders have our back. And here in the township of Pequannock, we feel that that is not happening.
Okay, let's speak to Michael in Belleville. You're the mayor of that town. I mean, what we were just hearing there from Ryan, does that ring true?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, every single mayor here in New Jersey is well united. I mean, this started for us here in New Jersey 4 weeks ago. It's been about a week since all the mayors were gathered really close to Trenton, our capital, for a briefing with our state police. And we were all invited to a call with the White House on Monday where the same talking points were reiterated. You know, nothing to see here. We're seeing manned aircraft, a lot of misidentification. But it's the communication that's coming out of the White House has been concerning. I mean, we just heard our president say nothing to see here. The Intelligence Committee members had a classified briefing, and they came out and said nothing to see here. But yet our Foreign Affairs chairman in the House is basically saying that he believes it's China. And yet another congressperson from New Jersey is saying it's an Iranian mothership off our coast. We need some clear communication. The absence of truth and transparency in this matter is doing nothing but fuel social media conspiracies.
There is this theory that there's some missing radioactive material out there, and that's why these drones are hovering in the skies above areas of New Jersey. I mean, Ryan, have you heard anything about this?
You know, as the mayor of Belleville was saying, unfortunately, by not giving us answers, you start having all of these conspiracy theories. And yes, I've heard that one. I've heard things about aliens. I've heard a bunch of things. Now, I will be honest with you. New Jersey does have an issue with aliens, but that has nothing to do with drones. The issue with the drones is we know that these drones are flying overhead. They're flying over critical infrastructure. They're flying over our townships. They're flying over our families and our friends. And this has nothing to do with politics because these drones are flying over Republicans and Democrats and independent houses. They're flying over people of all races and creeds and color and the whole 9 yards. As the mayor of Belleville said, this is something that's uniting us. And as Americans, we want answers, and we're not getting those answers. We're getting the same answers. We've called media attention to this since 2 Sundays ago. So this is almost 2 full weeks, and we're literally no clearer now.
Yeah, it's dominating headlines around the world. And Mayor Melham, I want to ask you about this theory about the missing radioactive material. And I'm also wondering if you can just tell me from what you've seen, what sort of a size are we seeing here of drone? I mean, some people suggesting they're the size of SUVs.
They are. So we were on the mayor's call with the White House, and there was one mayor who stood out and spoke up and said, listen, I've had something over my house. It's 6 feet wide. It's the size of a small car. I've had it not once, I've had it twice. And yet they keep telling us that we're seeing things that we're not seeing. They keep telling us that we're misidentifying. But back to the radioactive material. So I kind of sparked this thing yesterday in an interview in New York City. So let's just split this up. It is not a theory that there's radioactive material on the loose. We are aware of that. That came from a federal agency, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Committee, on their .gov domain name. They talked about the fact that radioactive material was missing. Now, do I connect the 2 dots? Not necessarily, but do I believe that we do have our assets up in the sky, and since they are flying in a grid-like pattern, do I believe that they're searching and looking and potentially sniffing for something that might be considered a threat to us? I do.
So you think this sounds like some sort of act of incompetence, and someone is doing a bit of a recce to try to work out what happened to this missing radioactive material, and that's why no one's giving you clear answers. I mean, is that roughly your logic here, Mayor Melham?
I do believe, as the mayor said, we do have assets. We were told that from our state police, that we do have assets that are over our critical infrastructure. I do believe that those are ours. I lived through the Bush era threat level warnings, different color codes, and at a certain threat level, we do certain things. So it's totally plausible to think that our government has some assets over our critical infrastructure. Like my friend here, the mayor, he's got reservoirs, within his boundaries. Do I think we have assets over those infrastructures? Yes. Do I also think that we are potentially searching and sniffing for something? I do. Do I think it's in particular that particular radioactive material? Not necessarily. I do think that we are aware of a threat, and I do think that we're potentially out there looking for it. And if that's the case, that's fine. Just tell the American people. I no longer think or question who's really in charge of the drones or who owns the drones. It's more about why are they up there? These are the questions that we want from our federal government.
I'd just like to ask you, Mayor Ryan Hurd, I mean, we're hearing a lot of people in the opposition. Obviously, there's a change of administration happening in the next month in the United States. And there are a number of Republicans who are suggesting that the current administration is withholding information about all of this. And I'm just curious because I was given to understand that people in the incoming administration were party to the same kinds of intelligence briefings as people in the current administration. I don't know if people are saying anything about that in the United States and why, therefore, there should be any doubt in the minds of people in the incoming administration about what the government's saying here.
Well, we would hope that they're transparent, but the reality is the current administration in America is grossly incompetent, to say the very least, possibly even nefarious. I mean, not only are they lying to the American people, they can't even lie correctly. One hand is not talking to the other, and we're getting Kirby and Mayorkas saying different things on different days, and yet we have, New Jersey State saying, putting a presentation together and saying that if you do see a down drone, stay away from it, call 911, call the bomb squad, don't approach without a hazmat, and close off 300 feet. I mean, that's kind of scary. So that's an issue. I'm hoping, I'm pretty much guaranteed that the administration that is coming in will absolutely fix this problem. With that said, the last time that President Donald Trump was in office, there were people working against him by not giving him correct information or withholding information. So my worry is that the things will still be the same. As Americans, we have to demand better as our elected leaders. If you're an elected leader of a town in New Jersey as a mayor or a councilman or something like that, we have a responsibility to a people. Whether it's, fixing potholes, picking up garbage, whatever that is, we're on the front lines. It seems as if the higher you go up in the elected leader role, the less connected you are with the people. And they tend to forget who they work for. In America, as an elected leader, you work for the American people, not for yourself. That's the whole job. And that's why last Wednesday, when all of these mayors got together, over 180 mayors out of this great state of New Jersey, and our governor wasn't even there, that's why we were so angry. That's your job. We expect you to be there. Whether or not you're going to add anything to the conversation, there's still an expectation.
Mayor Michael Melham, what are your thoughts on what's just been said?
Absolutely. I mean, we all heard Trump speak this past week. He said that our government knows. He said very clearly that our president knows. And when he was asked point blank whether or not he was going to come to New Jersey this weekend, he said no. So these are the questions that we're seeking. We know our federal government knows. You can't tell me that we don't know what's flying just hundreds of feet above our house. We have technology in this country, greatest country in the world. They could read your driver's license number from a mile up in the sky via satellite. Probably why it's still in your pocket, by the way. There's no way they don't know what's going on, and it's time for them to come clean and tell the American people what's happening in our airspace just over our heads.
Yeah, and Mayor Michael Melham, let me stay with you for just a moment because, I mean, obviously, this isn't necessarily a new phenomenon. I'm told there are something like 8,500 drones in the air above the United States at any one time. This has become a hobby. There's lots of these bits of equipment around the place. But I mean, seeing what you're seeing in the skies above your house, above the town that you are mayor of, I mean, are you managing to sleep at night?
It's very difficult. My residents are anxious, they're concerned, they're worried, some are scared. And they, as the mayor just said, they look to us. We are the mayors on the ground here. We are closest to the people. They look to us for answers. We, in turn, look up to the state government, which has failed New Jerseyans, has failed us, their lack of communication. If I was the governor of New Jersey, I'd be in Washington right now demanding answers. And they're not getting the answers, which is concerning. But you're right. I mean, the facts are the facts. There's about 1 million drones here in the United States, about 800,000 drone operators / pilots. But here's what we know. We know the drones that are flying over our critical infrastructure are not emitting radio frequencies. These are not personal drones. These are not commercial drones. They're not emitting a radio frequency, which makes it very hard to down them. We can't jam them because they're not emitting radio frequencies, and our state police has told the mayors, we have no idea where they're coming from and where they're landing. The fact that we can't chase these things. Our own governor said when we had a helicopter in the sky and got close to it, the lights went out and it disappeared. These are not personal drones. These are not part of that 1 million. This is clearly either a government operation or a foreign adversary I'm on the belief that it's our government up there.
Mayor Ryan Hurd, are you encouraging people in your town to take matters into their own hands? I mean, some have suggested shooting these things down. We know that people in the United States, many people do carry arms. Is that something that people have been doing?
So first thing I want to say, absolutely in no way, shape, or form are we asking or encouraging anybody to shoot anything down. That's not what we do. Whether or not we have guns, yes, America has more guns per capita than any other place in this world, which makes America great. With that said, no, we are not going to be shooting any drones down. We are not going to be trying to catch any. We're not going to be sending up our hobby drones to try to take pictures of the drones. That is a federal government issue. Do I like them to shoot one down? Absolutely, over the ocean where nobody is and it's not going to cause any harm. The problem with any resident trying to do that is the unintended consequences. God forbid you were to shoot one down or catch one or anything, interfere with its operation, and it lands in your neighbor's house, killing 6 people. That's a big deal, and I don't want to have to report on that, and I don't want to have to deal with that. I never want that to happen. With that said, these are not class 1 or class 2 drones. So when we say drones, it's kind of like saying Kleenex. It's just a word that we're using for this. But the reality is when I say drones, a typical person is thinking about something, maybe the palm of their hands or the palm of 2 hands together. The reality is these are class 3 and class 4 drones. They're about the size of an SUV. They're much larger. As the mayor said, they are not emitting any frequency. So it's thinking as this is a mission that is pre-programmed in the drone goes off, it does its grid pattern, and then it comes back to wherever that is. We need answers now, and we expect our government to do much better. But I expect the residents of my town not to try to take things in their own hand. With that said, unfortunately, because of the way the world is today, when you hear things about Syria, when you hear things about Ukraine, this is on Main Street media, it's on X, it's on YouTube, they see what's happening and how warfare has changed with drones. So the residents are asking, based on the size of these drones, is that something that can happen in New Jersey? And unfortunately, I have to say, that is a possibility. Now, I hope with God's grace, it will never happen, but it's what everybody is seeing, and that is why our residents are staying up at night.
Yeah, indeed. And you're both mayors in a state that's home to several airports, Newark probably being the most famous of them to an international audience. We're hearing this report from the US Federal Aviation Administration. There's been something like a 269% increase in the number of cases of lasers being pointed at aircraft, presumably by members of the public, but we don't know that. Mayor Melham, I mean, how dangerous is this potentially?
It is, and I echo the mayor's sentiments. We are not advising residents to take the law in their own hands. Our skies, our federal airspace, if you do try and fire upon a drone, and again, a drone is considered an aircraft. If you do try and fire, it is a federal offense. That being said, here in Belleville, New Jersey, we're located in northern New Jersey. We border the largest city in New Jersey, Newark. We sit right smack in the middle of Newark International Airport airspace, as well as Teterboro Airport and the international airports of JFK and LaGuardia. We do have FBI guidance that's asking us to communicate to our residents, to inform them to stop using lasers. Pilots have reported landing and taking off. They are clearly being distracted. They have reports of pilots asking the FBI to have mayors here on the ground communicate to our residents to stop pointing laser pointers at these drones, or what they believe is a drone.
Okay, we're coming to the end. I'd just like to put that same question to Ryan Hurd, and I just want to wrap up and perhaps give you the last word here and ask you, a question that I've been wondering myself. I mean, what does it say about the United States today that so few people seem to believe what the authorities are telling them, and there's so much skepticism about what the government is and isn't saying?
Well, I'll be honest with you. This is exactly why it makes America great. Because the American people are not going to sit back and just accept what the government is telling us. That's the whole reason why this experiment that we call America is together. Our job as citizens is to challenge the government, to make sure that power is in check, to remind them that the government works for we, the people. That's the whole reason why we exist. I think this is a good thing on a couple of different ways. On one, we are challenging the government and we are showing the incompetence of our government today. And we, the people, will not stand for that. On another note, think of it like this. With these drones, if anything good is coming out of it, we have Christmas right around the corner where we're going to be celebrating with family and friends. You know, this is something that has actually brought us together. You have the mayor of Belleville, you have the mayor of Pequannock, and you have a whole bunch of other mayors that came together asking the same question, regardless of what our background or affiliation is. You have the American people that are now looking up into the sky and they're not looking into their phones as much. It's a great way to bring people together. And that is the reason why we, the people, make America so great.
Ryan Hurd, you have had the last word. Thank you very much indeed to you. Thank you as well to Mayor Michael Melham. Great to have had you both with us.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on today's edition of Global News Today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for a special program with the highlights of the past week.